The next presentation is from Ivana, and Ivana is probably the only person who is not actually doing technology. I managed to do that almost now. She is going to change one day, I think. And Ivana is doing something very interesting, which is called co-creation. And she's doing it in the festival context, but a lot of the co-creation things we see already on eTourism, and in fact, a lot of the co-creation is being facilitated by technology. Ta-da!
Thank you. Hi, my name is IvanaRihova. I'm part of the John Kent Institute in Tourism at the School of Tourism and the eTourism lab, slightly by accident. But yeah, this presentation is going to be quite a bit less techy than what you're probably going to see the rest of the afternoon and what you've seen so far. But nevertheless, there's some interesting things that I think might be of great potential for things like social marketing and the kind of newly emerging kinship economy, and potentially the use of technology is some of these concepts I'm going to be talking about. So basically what it's all about is this concept of customer-to-customer co-creation. And I'm specifically looking at the context of festivals as a really interesting research context in which I'm doing my PhD. So I'd like to start with getting you to think about what marketing is. What does it actually do? What is it for? In my research, the most important concept is value. And value is, in marketing, arguably one of the most important notions in marketing. So if you look at the definition of marketing, identifying, anticipating, and satisfying customer requirements profitably. So it's about really looking at what the customer might want, what his needs are, what they would benefit from, what they actually value. So if you look at producing products and services, the producer, the tourism or service organization, try and design some kind of product or service, and then produce it and distribute or deliver it to the customers. So in this sense, the service organization is a producer, and the customer sort of at the receiving end, manipulable, sort of passive recipient of this value that's embedded in the service or the product. However, as we know, and as we're probably going to be hearing about in this afternoon, customers are no longer passive, manipulable elements in this marketing system. They're actually active, they're autonomous, they're much more empowered than they ever have been because they're networked. They live in this virtual world where they can communicate with each other, and very often that happens outside the service provider sphere. That happens purely in the customer sphere. So if you look at things like customer communities, brand communities, that might be some of the examples why this is important. So just providing value by designing some kind of service and just leaving it to the customer to take whatever the service provider has designed might not longer be enough to get a competitive advantage. So in my research, what I'm really looking at is something that I call socially dense service settings. So I'm kind of not really talking about the online environment, but the physical environment. Now, why is that important? If you think about some service settings, such as, for instance, arguably this could be a service setting or an event, a football match, it would probably not be that much fun if you were just sitting in the stadium and watching the match by yourself. It's the experience of being there with loads of hundreds and maybe sometimes thousands of people in the stadium enjoying, sharing, co-creating that experience together. Things like guided tours, cultural tourism, you might be going with your friends, your family, but also conversely, the experience is affected by someone sort of talking to each other in the background constantly while you're trying to listen to the guide talking you through the museum or the chateau. Conferences, when the boring presentations are over, what happens? You've got the social aspect of that conference experience. Professor Buhalis will probably tell you all about that, I'm sure. He's not listening, is he? So it's not just sitting there and absorbing lots of knowledge, which is the sort of service element of that event, of the experience, but it's this exchange of knowledge, co-creating that knowledge with your peers, with the with the conference attendees, and then socializing later and perhaps meeting friends. That happens quite often on the academic circle. Go to conferences, meeting friends, and exchanging knowledge and collaborating together. Festivals, that's my context of choice, particularly because festival research, a lot of motivational research suggests that festivals specifically very often are about the social experience, not just going and listening to music. It is about spending some time with your friends, coming together with your family, spending time with your kids. So that's why I'm focusing on festival in my research. So as I said, these are all interaction-rich, socially dense service settings. So it's not just about delivering the core service content or the product. It's about the value that's co-created in this shared social collective experience. That's the crucial part. So for that reason, I'm looking at the context of festivals, and specifically not value and what it is, but more, I'm not trying to sort of determine different types of value, what exactly people get out of it in terms of their personal benefits, but rather I'm interested in how this value co-creation actually happens, the sort of black box, the process of it. What do people actually do to co-create this value, and how could that be interesting from the service provider's perspective? So I'm not going to go into my methodology or what I actually did too much. I'll just quickly summarize. I went along to 5 festivals last summer. There were all different types of festivals, all outdoor, family-friendly, relatively small events. And I would go along with my tent and spend the 3 days observing and interviewing, just talking to people. So I conducted, I think it was 52 interviews altogether, and I was asking people about, so what do you actually do when you're here in terms of the social aspect of your festival experience? And I've got some really interesting findings, and this is the kind of one of the preliminary frameworks that I got coming out of this. These are some of the social practices in which value is formed from my perspective in the context of festivals. The most important thing about this little diagram is the 2 halves of it. On the top, you've got something that I call the private domain, and that's where value is sort of positioned or located in this context of festivals when people come together. We've got the private domain up on top and then the public domain at the bottom. The private domain, what that's about is co-creation that's sort of oriented inwardly. That's, social psychology calls it in-groups, something called in-groups. So people you sort of associate yourself with, your friends, your family, who you're at the festival with, or who you've met up with at the festival, but also something called neo-tribes or subcultures. So this may be, for instance, folkies at the folk festival, kind of coming together and perhaps improving their skills or jamming together at the festival. And then at the public level, you've got practices which are oriented outwardly. So this is how people socialize, intergroup socializations with strangers, or these chance encounters that you've got with people in that service settings. So just to give you some example, these are the 6 practices that I've identified as the main sort of categories of value co-creation among customers in festival settings. The first one, this is just what I've just talked about, the neo-tribes. So this was 3 or 4 of the festivals I went to were built around a specific theme or topic or genre. So I had the folk festival. I also had something called the Van Fest that was oriented at Volkswagen campers. So these were the practices that related to the sense of belonging to that subculture or that neo-tribe. So I've got a small group of folkies sort of jamming, playing guitar, and quite interestingly, they didn't spend much time actually going to the music acts, but rather they would sit at the campsite and exchange music and tunes and just play with each other. Bonding practice, families spending time together. This is mum and daughter I spent some time just walking around with, and it was really obvious how they don't see each other very often, and coming to the festival for them was an opportunity to sort of catch up and to spend some time with each other. So again, from the service provider's perspective, you wouldn't really think about that, would you? Obviously festivals are an opportunity that they're put together to bring people together, but at the same time, most festival organizers I spoke to were focusing on what should the lineup be, what kinds of services do we provide, and not really, oh, how will the mothers and daughters socialize with each other? What can we do to make that easier for them? Detaching practice, this was actually quite interesting as well. Well, I found that some people came to the festival not really to socialize with people or to go and listen to the music, but rather sit in the campsite all afternoon and read a book, or just spend some time with their friends and families, sort of completely detached from the rest of the kind of social atmosphere at the festival. They would just spend a slightly different kind of holiday with their husbands or wives, for instance. Now, going to the public level, this is what most people will think of when you say festivals. So it's this sort of hedonistic, ludic, transgressive behaviors, dressing up and getting drunk and socializing and hugging lots of strangers. And in the literature, this is called a sense of communitas, so sort of a sense of belonging and togetherness that comes about from this classless socializing. So all these notions of social class will sort of disappear, that there are no barriers. People sort of have a sense of being together in that setting and not really judging anyone. Connecting practices, this was all about collaborating and sharing and helping strangers, and perhaps establishing these sort of short-term relationships in the context of the festival, of that social event. And this, again, could be quite interesting from the service organizer's perspective, because you don't really think of your customers as helping each other. You sort of think of them as, consuming your service, but not really interacting with each other. That happens quite a lot in retail settings, for instance. More experienced customers in garden centers, for example, might go and help another customer choose the right kind of plant. Why not try and support that in some way? This is actually one of the festival organizers did try and do that. So they would provide boards and get people to advertise if they wanted to share a lift to the festival. This is more to do perhaps with trying to be green, but at the same time, similar kinds of practices could be seen in other contexts as well. Finally, you probably can't see that very well, but this is couples sitting outside their camper van, and a stranger just going past and saying hi, and then stopping for 5 minutes, chatting about the weather, chatting about what they've seen on the previous day. This is to do with the sense of sort of friendliness and kind of amiability in that setting by being sort of polite and just having short conversations and just being sociable, but not on a very immersive, intensive level. So that was the other finding, actually. If you look at these, I've got them on a continuum from sociality on the left-hand side, belonging and communing practices, to sociability on the right-hand side. That's the sort of less immersive, less intensive co-creating when it comes to sort of people coming together. So you've got detaching as in just focusing on your own co-creating practices, and amiability, again, sort of less immersive, less intensive co-creation. So what does that mean for the service organization? Quite interestingly, actually, first of all, I'm looking at opportunities for some sort of value facilitation or co-creation facilitation that could be perhaps adopted by the service organization. So I'm using this qualitative, very in-depth ethnographic style approach to describe these practices. What do people actually do? And that knowledge could perhaps be used by the service organization to then go and see how they could support these co-creation practices. So, when I talked about mother and daughter coming together at the festival, or families coming together at the festival, how could these practices be improved? I mean, you can only do that if you know exactly what happens. So in that sense, this is one of the contributions of my studies, providing these in-depth insights. And then secondly, this is the techie bit. Quite interestingly, I did ask about technology. I did actually look at things like smartphone use, social media use, because I was quite interested to see what happens in these contexts. I mean, festivals specifically, you do see increasingly in the festival sector, technology is being used much more. More commercial music festivals are starting to use things like contactless payment systems, when you have a wristband and you can pay for your beer at the bar just by touching the wristband to the device that they've got on the bar. Social media, again, Glastonbury is on at the moment. It's all on TV. There's lots of media attention around that. Smartphones, again, most people will have seen at some point a picture of a concert taking place at the stage, and then a sea of smartphones in front of them. So everyone's sort of sharing content, and technology starts to be ubiquitous in this context as well. But actually, surprisingly, I didn't see any of that at these festivals. Might be just the nature of those festivals I went to, but a lot of the people I spoke to told me that, no, we don't want technology here. We're here to escape, to get away from all that, to disconnect, just to actually experience something real in that social sense, face-to-face interaction and socializing. So there was a very clear sense that people actually do want to come back into the physical, social reality of being in that socially dense service environment. But nevertheless, there might be some opportunities to use, for instance, the belonging and the bonding social practices before and after the festival. Again, people were talking about sharing the experience online while it's happening, but also afterwards, families sort of interacting on Facebook and arranging the festival visit, friends doing the same thing. And these tribes increasingly using Facebook and social media to sort of bond outside the festival context as well. And this experience is then just the culmination of those kinds of interactions. So in that sense, technology and social media could be used to keep these practices going, and to perhaps in the spirit of the kinship economy that I mentioned at the start, trying to establish relationships with the customers, and perhaps try and sort of nudge your way as a service provider into these practices using technology and social media specifically to then, for those customers, come together in those physical contexts. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivana. And you can see that Ivana is not necessarily doing work on technology, but actually technology is coming to co-creation, and people increasingly, they experience their experience, they live their life through technology. And if anybody has seen the inauguration of the Pope recently, and the 10 years before and 10 years after, before the previous Pope was inaugurated, in the previous inauguration, everybody was praying. In the current inauguration, everybody was taking a picture and a video on their or on their Android phone or any smartphone. Sultana is looking at me, and every time I say iPhone, she goes, no. Okay, any questions for Ivana? Any quick questions for Ivana? Yep, I'm running. That's my exercise for the day. Perfect.
Thank you, Catherine Devenish.
Would you like to say where you're from and what you perfume?
Yes, I'm interested in culture and tourism particularly, and I use Charlie.
Very nice. Very nice.
And now I've forgotten the question. Oh, yes, presumably you were in rural areas because you talked about camping, and I wondered how much you think that the lack of signal has an effect on people's not using social media, and whether once that changes, that will make a difference.
Exactly. Yeah, that was one of the things, actually. the provisions for the supporting technology in the festival context is not that great at the moment. I mean, the bigger festivals are really trying to provide things like charging facilities, where you can actually go and charge a smartphone. And I think I've heard that some of them even will have their own sort of little mini mobile system of signal transmitter so that you can get signal. But I think it probably depends. I think there will always be smaller events that will actually consciously try and detach themselves from that because of what I talked about. People do want to have these social, physical experiences. And also, the weather is a big factor. And if you drop your smartphone in a puddle of mud, it's not the best thing. And I saw that. So there's actually advice, people saying, do not bring your smartphone if you don't want to get it nicked or destroyed in the mud, because, yeah.
I cannot go to any of these festivals. First of all, my BlackBerry is running out of battery, and two, it's kind of not an ideal environment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ivana.